Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I watched one of G-Man's videos earlier this evening, and he talked about an interview that Anthony Fowler had given, during which he said that Daniel Dubois, when he was part of the GB squad, or when Fowler was part of the GB squad, had badly rattled Anthony Joshua in sparring. And does this therefore have any relevancy to the fight that's coming up? Bear in mind, this would have been when Dubois was an amateur. And G-Man's assessment was it doesn't have any relevancy at all. Sparring. So you buzzed a guy, who cares? Anything can happen in sparring because sparring is not fighting. Now, I agree with that. There is the slight caveat that, it can affect you. It only affects you if you let it affect you. If you're someone who is going to allow that sort of thing to prey on your mind. But if you're that type of person, I very much doubt whether you would have reached the heights that either Dubois or Joshua are now at. Joshua, two-time world champion. Dubois recently became the high-tar, full-fat version of the IBF's champ. So he's in the record books as a heavyweight champ too. So, these are two guys that have performed at a very, very high level, albeit in different generations, would you call them? One guy 8 years older than the other. Nevertheless, you don't get to that pinnacle without having some sort of mental strength and without... if you're the type of person that lets, say, one bad round of sparring stick in your mind for years upon years, you're probably not going to get anywhere in boxing anyway. You're probably psychologically quite brittle. And I don't think either of these fighters is, by everyday standards, that weak or that fragile. But it did get me thinking, this whole debate that... what is sparring? I mean, sparring is essentially practice. That's what it's there for. And the reason that people read too much into sparring sessions is because they don't seem to know the difference between a fight and a spar. Now, there are plenty of guys who openly admit that in sparring, they're just... because they're practicing, because they're taking new ideas and, working them out, and new techniques maybe, or a certain type of strategy for a certain particular fight, they're going to make mistakes. No one's born good. It doesn't matter what you talk about. We all start off as bad, just like we all start off as ignorant, and we all have to gather wisdom. No one is born wise. We're all born ignorant, and we have to gain wisdom in incremental steps. So it is that with any kind of vocation, any kind of talent, you have to be bad at it before you can be good. And if you're trying out new ideas, it's not just going to come together like that. It may come together quickly if you're a naturally talented person, but you've still got to make it second nature. And the way to do that is to make mistakes, get the mistakes out behind closed doors. I always remember Marvin Hagler, who I'm a massive fan of. Marvin Hagler. He's one of my favourite fighters. And he frequently said, Marvin Hagler was only floored once in his professional career, and that was against Juan Roldan. And that was really a slip. If you look at it, he's kind of slipped over the punch. You know what I mean? You've seen it given. You've seen that type of knockdown given. It's in the first round against Juan Roldan. Of course, he would go on to knock out Roldan, but he wasn't remotely hurt. I mean, at the very worst, you could call it a flash knockdown. But that's the only time he was ever on the floor in his whole career, and he fought some very good men. A lot of them before he even became world champ, by the way. He did that, that Philly circuit thing. Boogaloo Watts, and a few others, although he fought a very old Benny Briscoe as well, past it, but still took him the distance because Benny was a hell of a fighter as well. One of those, best to never win a world title fighters. But the thing is that Marvin would talk relatively openly after he'd retired about the fact that in sparring, he was floored many times. He was hurt many times, and Marvin had one of the great chins. But he would openly say, yeah, of course, I was trying out new ideas. I was, it wasn't second nature to begin with. I had to get to that point. Um, Another one, I mean, a more recent example of someone who openly admits that he would have rough days at the office with regards to sparring was George Groves. He said very often I'd go in with black eyes and bruised and abrasions, and because he was getting beaten up in the gym. But that's where you want to be beaten up, if at all. You don't want to be beaten up in come fight night, do you? You want to get it, steel sharpen steel and all those cliches. You want to get to the point where, the old line, another cliche, failure to prepare is preparation to fail. You want to be preparing, and a big part of preparing for anything is making mistakes, not knowing things, discovering things. Your confidence grows, your self-esteem grows the more you learn, and so on and so forth. Another thing about these sparring stories is that very often the context isn't considered. So, for example, if you're getting some serious sparring in for an upcoming fight, you might, let's say you're facing a southpaw, for example, who's shorter than you. So they've got 3 or 4 sparring partners who are short southpaws. What will happen is you'll be in the ring and they'll be doing 2 or 3 rounds each with you. So by the time the 3rd or 4th one gets in the ring, you've already done, maybe 9 rounds of sparring, and they're fresh. They're jumping in the ring. And none of those sparring partners might have your talent or your reputation or anything like that. They may not go on to achieve what you've achieved. But if you get into the ring with someone if you're in the ring and then someone gets in and you've done 9, 10 rounds and they're fresh as a daisy, they stand a good chance of at least slapping you around a bit. You know what I mean? So there's that to consider as well. That can happen. Guys get floored. They just get roughed up a bit. That's why whenever you hear fighters say, yeah, well, when we sparred years ago, I beat him easily. I showed him, I stood him on his head. What about the context? What about the context of that? There was I'm going to forget his name, a lightweight fighter who was an IBF lightweight champ. What the hell is his name? He's got a ton of tattoos. I'm not going to remember his name. He's popped into my head because he actually, no, he didn't build his reputation on this, but the strong rumor was that when he sparred Floyd Mayweather, he absolutely slapped him around and stood him on his head, and Mayweather couldn't get near him. And I wish I could remember the guy's name. Former IBF lightweight champ, lots of tattoos, might have done a bit of time in jail, was an alcoholic and came good. Only ever lost 1 professional fight. Put it in the comments if I'll remember it as soon as I hit the stop button on this fucking video. I'll remember the name. But anyway, he said, yeah, I had a great day. I battered Floyd, but it was just sparring. It was just one day. I was on it and he wasn't. So what? That was always his attitude, and that's the right attitude to have. There's so many other examples you can give, and again, sometimes sparring is working on a specific strategy or a specific technique. So, I mean, I've seen guys, if you're a beginner, I'll give you one example. Okay, I remember when I was learning how to jab, I wasn't allowed to throw my other hand. I was the guy I was facing. We weren't really sparring. We were only a couple of kids. We must have been about 9 or something like that. But I'm unorthodox. I'm right-handed, so I was pumping my left hand, jab, jab, jab. The other guy was also orthodox. The other kid was, jab, jab, jab. And for some reason, I couldn't get near him. I just couldn't get near him. He was popping my bang, bang, bang. He was spinning around like a pinball. And I think I was taller. I mean, we were through it like really young kids. But for some reason, I think it was timing. I didn't realize it at the time. So I remember the guy, David, his name was, who was looking after us. He said, the reason you can't land is your timing's off. I didn't even know what he meant by that at the time. Like I said, I was about fucking 8, 9, something like that. So I'm very, very young. But that's just one very basic, very, very simple example of how you learn. And I wasn't allowed to throw my backhand. The other kid wasn't allowed to throw his backhand. But the other kid was pinging me around, and it's just because he was using more intelligence. And I just thought I had to stick my hand out, bang, bang. And it ain't like that. You know what I mean? You got to do some thought with it, you know. And they do say, of course, that, you know, in the gym, 80% of what you do is mental. 80% is physical and 20% is mental. And then when you get in the ring, 80% is mental and 20% is physical. Well, the way that you prepare for that physical test, that mental test, that psychological test, the emotional test, is to repetition in the gym. You know, doesn't matter whether it's doing something very, very basic like how to throw a jab, or whether it's, I don't know, body work. It could be anything, couldn't it? You know, fill in the blank, whatever you like. So I don't think that this supposed, you know, this latest in a whole slew of sparring stories means a thing. I don't think it matters at all that Dubois may have rattled Joshua. Apparently, Joshua was shaken, and Rob McCracken stopped the spar, let him get his legs under him again, and then they resumed work. But does it matter? Not remotely. Unless Joshua was to let it to, and I don't think he will. I don't think that'll happen at all. I don't think it matters remotely. And also, if you want another example, of course, look at Daniel Dubois and Filip Hrgović. Hrgović battered Dubois when he was still a kid in sparring, and Dubois didn't deny it. He was like, so what? I was a kid. So are you going to hang your hat on that? Didn't get to him, did it? You know, of course not. He, in the ring on fight night, he absolutely battered Hrgović. Although Hrgović was landing some very serious right hands, that's a video for another day. The gaps in the defense of Daniel Dubois is probably, you could do a video on that alone. But the point I'm making is, psychologically, mentally, it didn't get to Dubois, nor should it have done, because he was a kid. He was a bloody kid, you know. And on the day, he stopped Hrgović. It's called maturing. It's called learning. It's called confidence. It's called all those things that go to make up a winning fighter. So those are my opinions on sparring. If you've got any of your own, please leave them below in the comments section. And as always, thank you for your time. I always appreciate you watching my videos. Like the video if you liked it, and hit the subscribe button if you're new. I always appreciate you supporting the channel, and I will have a read of what you've got to say, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Much love. Bye for now.